One mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about the first 3 episodes of the new HBO series Station 11. This show is created by Patrick Somerville, who was both a writer and producer on The Leftovers, which is one of my all-time favorite shows. And I see a whole lot of similarities between this and The Leftovers, and it kind of makes it so I don't even really know where to start. There's so many different complex themes jumping back and forth in time, too close to home pandemic moments, confusing moments and scenes that we see out of context that we don't get the context for until later. So I don't know. There's so much. I'm probably just gonna start going episode by episode because I don't want this to take too long because there's so much to analyze and break down and discuss with this show that if I tried to do that, I'd either end up with an episode for a video for each episode that runs each video runs 40 minutes or something, or I'd have one video covering all 3 episodes and it'd be 2 hours long or something. So I kind of there's gonna be stuff that I'd like to discuss about these first 3 episodes that I'm just not gonna have time to get to, but I want to kind of give a breakdown of what took place on the show and some of the things that I found interesting. So I'm gonna start with episode 1. We meet Jeevan and Kirsten. Jeevan's at a play with his girlfriend, and he sees another guy who we're gonna come to grow a little bit more familiar with later, named Arthur, who's the lead in King Lear. And this guy has a heart attack and collapses on stage. Jeevan runs on the stage, and he doesn't even have any kind of medical training, which I thought was interesting because he gets up there and he goes, "Is anybody a doctor?" And I'm thinking, I assumed you were a doctor since you ran up there. And I'm like, maybe this guy just really wants to help people, which ends up being the case. And he sees Kirsten, this little girl, who's watching all of this take place. And he asks Kirsten, who's supposed to be watching you? She says it's some person named Tracy, who's the wrangler who watches all the kids during these plays. And Tracy can't be found. He links Kirsten up with Tracy eventually, and then he leaves, but then he sees Kirsten standing outside because Tracy left in the ambulance with Arthur. So now he's in a place where he kind of has to decide, okay, again, this is a guy who wants to do the right thing, who wants to help people. Honestly, we need more people like that in this world who just want to do the right thing and help people. And even though it's weird to try to take an 8-year-old somewhere, she is essentially a lost child because apparently Jeevan cares more about her than her parents do. So he offers to walk her to the train station. Throughout the course of all of this, we start to see the start of this pandemic. His sister calls, and she raises all sorts of alarms, telling a guy who's apparently prone to panic attacks to start panicking. And we get an interesting kind of sequence during this episode where we can kind of see Jeevan starting to get a little less patient with Kirsten, who's only 8 years old, but he's sitting here trying to stifle his panic attacks because he's terrified, but still trying to put on a good face for this girl and make sure that she doesn't feel scared. And apparently, as we watch this unfold, we learn that Jeevan has 2 siblings, a brother and a sister. Frank was the brother's name. I can't remember the sister's name right now, but he's the least successful of the 3. She seems like she's apparently a doctor. She's working at a hospital. They're in Chicago, and the brother apparently won a Pulitzer at 23. I don't know. We're probably gonna get more of his story. He has a really nice place. It's on the 42nd floor of this fancy building. He walks with a limp and a cane, so something must have happened to him at some point. We don't know, but we also see brief flashes and interactions between Arthur, who I mentioned, who died on stage during the King Lear play, and a black woman named Miranda, and an older-looking white guy named Clark. And we don't get any context to these scenes. We can glean from it that Arthur and Miranda used to have a thing, and then we get a scene where Clark calls Miranda to inform her of Arthur's death. And there's so many questions that are raised from these brief scenes with these characters that we don't really know what's going on. So that was one of those things where like I felt like this is the sort of thing that I don't need to really panic here, because I'm gonna find out something about who these people are and how they're connected at some point later. But what we do glean from it is that Station 11 is looks like a comic book, but it's pretty thick, so it's probably like a full on graphic novel. And Kirsten is currently in possession of it, but it was given to her. It was given to Arthur from Miranda, and Arthur then gave it to Kirsten, and that's all we know. And they kind of leave that there for the most part. Let's see, where do I want to go next? The episode flashes forward 80 days, and we see Kirsten and Jeevan. I don't know why I couldn't remember his name for some moment. And they emerge, and he says, "Okay, we're gonna go to the lake." I don't know where Frank is. If Frank's coming, is Frank okay? We don't know where the brother is, but maybe it's just a thing where it's like, okay, they're going to the lake. It's in Chicago, so it's gonna be frozen over. Like I said, he has a limp or something, so maybe it's just like, hey, I'm not gonna go walk around on ice. I don't know, but let's see, where do we go here? And then at the end of the episode, also we see like a guy in a spacesuit up in space who can overhear the conversations between Jeevan and Kirsten. So there's a lot of cool things just on the surface with this first episode. I thought the visuals were really cool. They had this cool thing where when we're in the past, and actually let me place the time periods a little bit here. This pandemic takes place in 2020, and we spend time at various points in between 2020 and 2040, but 2040 is kind of where another portion of the story takes place, which you'll find out about in episode 2. And then we get other little flashbacks of things that happened post-pandemic, but prior to 2040, and things pre-pandemic. The pandemic is a flu that goes around, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But like I was saying, I really like a lot of the visuals here. There's some cool stuff that they do when they're jumping between time, when we're seeing pre-pandemic with Jeevan and Kirsten and Frank, and then there'll be like a scene where where a light flickers, and then it'll kind of like quickly cut back to a shot of that same shot, framed the exact same, but post-pandemic, and it's like whole lots of vegetation and desertion, and and the show opens that way as well, with like a scene that's like lots of vegetation. It's deserted. I think it was like some pigs or something, some sort of animals digging around. It looks like a place that no one's been in decades. And then the light flickers, and we see that it's the theater that the Arthur's King Lear play is taking place at. So I like that aspect of it. There's also some really cool shots that I like a shot of like just all of the cars bumper to bumper crammed in front of this hospital, just to help you get an idea of how much the world is going into a panic at this point. And then there was also another cool moment where we see a plane crash, but the plane is like, it goes by Frank's apartment window like real close, and you see it kind of like curving, and then you see it explode. That was a cool shot too. So lots of interesting things there. I liked Jeevan in this episode. I think he's one of the more interesting characters to me, because like I said, he seems driven by just doing the right thing and being a nice guy, and we don't get enough of that in this world right now. So like I like seeing somebody like that who just wants to do the right thing but isn't like overly kind of annoying, because like once he gets, he's walking around with Kirsten, and you could tell he's starting to get short with her, because he's, like I said, he's got all this pressure on him, and he starts to snap a little bit on her, but it's like you could tell that he's going through a lot and fighting back panic attacks and whatnot. So I found him to be pretty interesting as well. Yeah, and that's kind of all I'm going to say on episode 1 at this point. So moving on to episode 2, we open this episode with Kirsten as a child, and she meets this woman named Sarah, who's the conductor of what's called the Traveling Symphony, and it's a group of people. They're like it's stage coaches and wagons and shit, and all they do is they just go around Lake Michigan and they stop at various places and they perform Shakespeare for people. And it's 2040, so it's 20 years past the pandemic. And oh wait, hold on, what do I have here? Oh, I forgot to mention at the very beginning when Kirsten first meets Sarah, she's still a kid. And I think at some point I gleaned that it had been 2 years or something like that. And she's got bloody hands, she's got a knife, and she goes to attack this person, and the situation gets diffused. But Kirsten gives a lot of kind of like weird quotes almost. She mentions fixing a ship. She says that if she could do things over, she'd say goodbye to Arthur, Jeevan, and her little brother Frank, which was a weird, which is an interesting line because one, it tells us that Jeevan dies not too long after the pandemic, but it also tells us that apparently she has a little brother that's also named Frank, just like Jeevan has a brother named Frank. Or did she take him on as a younger brother in her mind? I don't know. And then she refers to herself as Dr. 11 at some point in this conversation as well. So back to when she's older, we meet people in this group, this traveling was it Traveling Symphony? I already forgot the name. Like I just said it like 45 seconds ago. We meet other people in this group. So let me look over here. We'll see which ones I wrote down. I already mentioned Sarah. There's a pregnant woman named Charlie. And there's someone who seems to be like almost kind of like a kid sister to Kirsten named Alex. And then at some point in the episode, this other guy, Dan, comes up and he goes to audition to join the group. And apparently this is his 5th time auditioning. They're kind of like tired of him. And he does like the monologue, Bill Pullman's monologue from Independence Day, which is interesting because if I was to do a monologue, I wouldn't do anything from Independence Day. But I feel like a lot of the people in 2040 would not even know what Independence Day was, because I feel like that came out in like the late 90s. So you're looking at like, you got to be over 40 years old, well over 40 years old, because you'd have to be 40 something years old just to be alive when it came out, let alone be old enough to have seen it and remembered it. So that was an interesting little monologue there. And this episode cuts back and forth a lot between like the present day with the Traveling Symphony and some scenes from Kirsten's past. And those scenes work together really well because we see her kind of like using her past trauma to fuel her acting present day. And I think I read an article that questioned whether or not this was intentional or not for her, as in this is her process, or this is just something that happened in that moment while she was trying to perform. But there was a mention at some point in the episode with Sarah saying that, I think Kirsten said like she hates Hamlet or something. And then she says, yeah, that's part of your process. Saying essentially you use that anger to fuel your performance. So that read to me, once I saw later her performing and crying and getting really emotional during her monologue, which is intercut with her as a kid finding out that her parents died in a really shitty way. It looked to me like she uses her trauma as fuel to better perform when she's acting. And speaking of the parents, so like as a kid, she's like texting her mom and dad's phone, like, it's actually a really sad scene. She's saying, I'm safe, I'm with a family, but please say something back. And then her phone lights up and it's a text from her mother, and it says something to the effect of like, the person whose phone this is here in this morgue. Don't come look for them. And she breaks down. It's a really sad scene. And she hugs Jeevan, and it sucks. And then we also meet this guy named David and his son Cody. Cody's late teens, 17, 18, 16, somewhere in that range, and he wants to join the group. And he carves this story that is essentially meant to make Kirsten and Alex believe that he's somebody that they don't need to be worried about. And Kirsten later reveals the errors that he made in his story that let her know she wasn't on the up and up. But I already caught those errors because, being from Michigan, he referred to a city that we have up north called Mackinac, and he called it Mackinac because that's how it's spelled. But if you're from here, it's pronounced Mackinac, and he called it Mackinac, and I was like, and I thought it was an error. I put in my notes to kind of lambast the show, like, come on now, but yeah, it was a clue that he was not on the up and up, and there was something else he did as well. But he at some point asks to join the group. She says no, and then he says something like, "Your friends are going to start to disappear." She puts a knife to his throat, and eventually she kills him after he says that your friends are going to. Well, no, she stabs him. I'm sorry, she stabs him, but she doesn't kill him. She doesn't finish the deed because Cody. We see at the end, Cody actually scoops him up and takes him away. So let's see, where else do I want to go? So a couple of scenes I like. I really like the scene where Kirsten is explaining to Alex what it was like pre-pandemic. Like, she's explaining like how Uber worked. She's explaining how cell phones work. And that's an interesting idea to think. Like, of course, when you have this sort of desolation where so many people are gone, you're not going to be able to still have those same things. So if you were born post 2020, you're not going to know anything. All you know is desolation. And the idea of like an iPhone or something like that is gonna be like, wow, tell me more. That sounds amazing. And it's like, it sounds like the future to them when it's their past. And I thought that was a interesting conversation. During this episode, Kirsten finds like this little figure in the grass, and it's like it looks like it's made out of like maybe like thick hay or like small sticks. It's just a weird figure, and she lingers on it, and I don't know if it's something that this figure comes up multiple times in both this episode and episode 3, and even now I still don't know if in this moment when Kirsten finds it, if it was left by someone else or if she left it. I believe it was left by someone else, but that someone else likely being the David guy that she ends up killing later. But I don't know, and maybe that'll come back, maybe it won't. But she finds this figure and she lingers on it. She lingers on it. The shape of this figure is also tattooed on her hand multiple times. It's also present in the Station 11 book, and it's left in blood on the rocks where she left David's body thinking that he was dead and he wasn't. So, and there's also a moment where David shouts some quotes from the book at her, and we learn that there's only, well, at the time, I believe we think there's only one copy, but she gives a copy to, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. There may be more than one copy, but she believes there isn't, and she's curious how he knows these quotes, because in her mind, she's the only person with this book. So one thing that I didn't like about this episode is when it was cutting back and forth between 2040 and 2020-ish, they would do this thing where they would kind of like have like the past or future audio playing over the opposite times visuals. And that was a struggle for me because I'm trying to retain and follow both. So I might be seeing Kirsten as a kid reading about her, or reading the text from her, from that morgue or whatever, saying that her mom's body is there. But I'm hearing adult Kirsten monologuing the Hamlet stuff. And like, it was hard for me to like follow both things simultaneously to the point where like I because I really wanted to try to tune in to the Hamlet stuff, because I wanted to see how the words tied into what we might be seeing from the past. But it's hard to focus on Shakespeare when you're watching a kid read a text about her parents dying. So like that bothered me a little bit, and they did that a lot in episode 2, where the audio was from something else from what you were watching, and like that I struggled with that a little bit. I don't think that was the best decision in the world. So moving on to episode 3, we get a lot of the context that we missed to the Arthur, Miranda, Clark storyline from episode 1. You remember I said that Miranda shows up at Arthur's house. They clearly had some sort of past. She says she finished it. We don't know what it is. And we see Clark call... well, no, we do know what it is. She did hand him the book because Kirsten asked, "What is that?" And he says, "This is the asshole who ruined my life." So we do know that she handed him the book. But we now in episode 3, we get some of that context as well to the Clark scene as well, because the Clark calling her to tell her about Arthur dying. I had questions about that scene as well, because like he calls, she goes, "How do you get this number?" He tells her that Arthur has died, and then we don't hear from her anymore. So in this episode, we find out what happened here. And there's a lot of interesting things that happen. And I wish I had more time to talk about each of these episodes, but I just wanted to give some, talk a little bit about what happened and then give my opinions on them. But we see how Arthur and Miranda met. It was kind of a chance meeting. He was already pretty famous as an actor. She was drawing in a cafe. He essentially kind of like convinced her to come to this party where we find out that he's friends with Clark. And they kind of, shut the party down. They're like, we don't see the party itself, but we come back later and they're the only three people there. And they mentioned something about the owner, since Arthur's a big shot, allowing them to stay past closing. But we see how they came to fall in love, fall out of love. And it's a whole kind of like story of their history. And these scenes are intercut with Miranda's experiences of the pandemic from Malaysia. So like her relationships with Arthur are pre-pandemic. She leaves to go to Malaysia right after she hands him the book. And then we see her experiences with the pandemic as well over in Malaysia. We learned that she has been, writing and drawing the Station 11 book. And now we're starting to like get the things tied together a little bit. Each of these stories that we've been presented with in these 3 episodes. We learn about Clark's call, the whole situation where she goes, "How did you get this number?" It was because she was on her sat phone over in Malaysia because her regular phone wouldn't work. They said something like the government was restricting information, so she was using that. And he said that her calls. He said that Arthur's calls were being forwarded to him. So, and she had called him earlier to kind of apologize and say that she was coming to Chicago to see him. We see Miranda draw the aforementioned symbol that I was talking about on a napkin. And she said it's like a symbol for her to means like cut and run. And I wondered from that if that was her way of saying that she kind of felt like kicking it with Arthur was maybe not the best idea in the world. Like both of them kind of seem like they like each other, but they simultaneously know they might not be right for each other, particularly from Miranda's perspective. But now we're kind of connecting that sign too. So we know she created that symbol. We know she created that book. And now we know that Kirsten is currently in possession of that book. Kirsten is currently familiar with that symbol. And now Kirsten is seeing that symbol when, from her perspective, no one else should know this symbol. So that gets a little interesting as well. We also learned that Arthur had an affair with this woman named Elizabeth. Earlier in the episode, she pops up and kind of like preemptively tries to put out a fire, but I guess Miranda doesn't read the tabloids, so she didn't even know it was a rumor. But we later find out that Arthur had a kid with Elizabeth. And in that scene where we find out, Miranda gives a second copy of the book to him to give to his kid. So that maybe his kid's name started with a T or something. I think it was like Travis or something. But in 2040, maybe the Dave guy that ends up getting stabbed is the son of Arthur and Elizabeth. He just gave a fake name or something. But that's my first little kind of prediction or whatever. But she says also in that scene that she has other copies. So where am I? So Miranda has been very possessive of her work so far. I'm kind of the same way. Like if I'm doing photography, I don't want anyone to see the photos until I'm done with them, as far as editing, all that kind of stuff. And she doesn't want anyone to see her book until it's finished. And Arthur betrays her, not just like I believe that she cared less about him having an affair with Elizabeth than he did about him showing Elizabeth her work. So she was working in this pool house. This is where she had all her work, all her drawings and everything she was writing. And apparently he showed Elizabeth this pool house. And you could see her instantly become enraged. She later burns down the pool house, which destroys all of her work, which when you call back to episode 1, when she says, "I finished it," it's not just that she finished the book. It's like now we know she had to start over again to finish it because she burned it all down in a fit of rage. So again, really good writing there to like make these really slick callbacks to things that we saw earlier, but we didn't have the context for. So they fight, and he gives a great line. He says, "I don't want to live the wrong life and die." And that's a fucked up thing to say to somebody. Like, because you say you say like, "I don't want to waste my time with you and then just die." I'm like, "Oh, I fucked up wasting my time with that person," and that ends up in her book. And I think that's gonna play out in some way, like how the contents of the book tie into Miranda's life and people that might have come in and out of it. But we'll see there. Let's see, where am I? I already said that. Yeah. So she gets on the phone with her boss, and he gives like this kind of like James Bond kind of plan to get her out of Malaysia. And it ultimately fails because when she's about to get on this boat, which she's going to be at sea for a year, she gets the call about Arthur, and she falls out. She busts her head, and the key for the boat falls into the water. So she has to return back to Malaysia. And there's a great scene where she was there to do a pitch to this company, and she returns, and they're trying to play like nothing happened because it got canceled earlier, but now they're saying it's back on. So she goes to do the pitch, and she has a great scene where she talks about, the love of my life died last night, and I came to work. Like, what? And she looks at the guy in charge and like, why did I miss being at that play? Why did I miss his last moments to be here in front of your motherfucking ass? Like, she didn't say it like that, but that was the energy she had. Like, why are we doing this? Like, we now know that none of this shit matters. Like, this pandemic is gonna wipe out everybody. This shit doesn't matter, and I'm still standing here talking to your ass, and I missed, the love of my life die because I'm out here doing this shit. And that was a great scene for her. I'm not familiar with that actress, but she was really good there. So a couple of thoughts, very similar structure to The Leftovers, and that's both a positive and a bit of a negative. The Leftovers for me was its most off-putting at the very beginning because it had a habit of answering one question and simultaneously raising an additional 10. So you go, okay, I have 10 questions, and you go into the next episode, one of those gets answered, but now we just tacked on another 10. It's like, okay, can I please learn something that's going on here? But The Leftovers became one of the most incredible shows ever. So that's still a pretty good compliment to compare it to The Leftovers. I like the characters. I'm interested to see where their stories go. The reviews make it sound like this is a really uplifting show, and I'm like, where are you getting that from? Like, I got a kid with dead parents, and this plane crash, and adult Kirsten stabbing motherfuckers. Like, there's so many different things that are going on. The way this relationship fails between Miranda and Arthur is pretty bad. It just takes this post-apocalyptic world from a different perspective, because you think of something like that, you think of The Walking Dead, you think of like desolation, having to shoot other people, having to be a piece of shit to survive, and this is kind of giving you a different, at least in episode 2 where we're in 2040, these people are taking a completely different approach, and this is, I guess, more like the heartwarming part almost, even though, like I said, Kirsten stabbing motherfuckers, but it is heartwarming to think like, okay, we're gonna go around the country, not around the country, but we're gonna go around this lake, and we're just gonna perform Shakespeare to remind people of what things once were, and that's a different approach to take, and I respect that. One thing I found watching like a behind the episode thing after episode 1 was that I said at the top that this has some too close to home pandemic scenes. They actually had already filmed 2 episodes before COVID even hit. So COVID didn't have an impact on how they structured this. So I think that's pretty interesting. I find out this flu wiped out 98% of the population. So there is nobody here anymore. And Perth is mentioned. And Perth was a big location in The Leftovers. And I'm sure there will be other moments from Leftovers as well. So right now, I'm looking forward to covering this show. I'm going to cover it till it's over. I believe it's 10 episodes. So for the next 7 weeks, I'm going to be covering this show. I find it to be frustrating a little bit at times from how confusing it can be, but confident that anything that I feel I'm not clear on, I'll become clear on at some point. So we got a lot of interesting characters here. We got a lot of interesting things going on at different points in time, and we have a whole lot of interesting themes and character relationships and how that relates to how you live a life after 98% of the world is gone versus how you might have been living it before. So there's all kind of interesting thematic stuff to talk about. This is the kind of show where the kind of insight and the kind of the attention to detail that I try to give Succession, I'm going to be giving this show, because this is one where I know I can easily come on here and talk for 30 minutes about one episode. And I'm at 30 minutes right now if we're talking about these three. So if you have like thoughts that you want to give, because I'm sure there's a lot, drop them in the comments. I'm going to try to get caught up on my comments over the next couple of days. And I will see you guys next Thursday for episode 4. Peace.